And welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, joined by my co-host, Matt Giraldi.
What's going on, guys?
And we are back on the mic going over our running back starts and sits for Week 7. Again, we mentioned it last episode with the wide receivers. There is just so much going on. It feels like a lot of injury news, a lot of things to consider here for your Week 7 matchups. So we're going to get into 12 of the guys that we really think are starts, sits, sleepers, and busts. So without further ado, let's get into the first guy, and that is Chuba Hubbard.
Over the last 4 weeks, Chuba has gotten anywhere between 17 and 26 touches per game. His lowest rush total in any of those 4 games is 92 yards. After scoring 1 fantasy point Week 1 and only 3 total touchdowns on the season, he is still RB7. So unfortunately, in one of my leagues after a porous Week 1, I cut Chuba Hubbard. So kind of embarrassed to admit that. I know it's just brutal. I had a couple good running backs, but it's just inexcusable, and I'm still kicking myself over it. But he gets the Commanders this week, who will obviously put up points on the Panthers, but Carolina has shown that they'll stick to the run even when they're playing from behind. He still has like over 100 rushing yards in the fourth quarters. Not to mention he's getting like 4 to 6 targets per game, so a good amount of work in the passing game.
Yeah, I think too, with the Washington matchup, they could be down, right? You mentioned he's still very involved in the passing game. They haven't in any game script really gone away from the run entirely, and even if they did, right down at 13 carries against Chicago in Week 5, but he then still went for 97 yards, so he's like shown efficiency too. Washington's defense is not great. I think they'll be able to move the ball. Chuba's been great. Another note, just season long on Chuba, I would really be trying to sell here if you could get anything for him. I do think Jonathan Brooks is going to come in and immediately take that passing game work. So if he's not efficient on the ground, I think it's going to be difficult for him to continue to put up big games without the passing game floor. And Brooks did have his window opened this week, so I think I don't think he's going to play this week, right? Or we wouldn't be talking about him, but I think Week 8 could be a target for him, depending on if he gets full practices. So keep an eye on that. If you can sell Chuba as like a top 10 play this week against the Commanders, that's something that I'd be looking into doing. Moving on to my start of the week here is JK Dobbins. So I love Dobbins this week, and it's just wild to see the insane workload that he's been getting. It's just like he had 28 touches last week and 25 carries. It's just like it's crazy. He looks healthy. He looks great. They come out of their bye week and just give it all to him. Gus Edwards, obviously on injured reserve, but then Vidal comes in and takes some of the passing game work, but they're really trying to run the ball a lot. So I don't think Vidal impacts his value at all. If you're concerned about him catching the long touchdown or whatever, or taking away a few carries, it's almost like you'd rather see that as a JK Dobbins owner so that he doesn't break down or get hurt on like this massive workload. So overall, going up against the Cardinals in a game that I think that they should be able to control the ball. The Cardinals don't have the greatest defense, and Kyler has not been playing very well. He's not been able to sustain drives against anybody early in games over the last 3. Ideally, the Chargers will control the clock in the first half. Dobbins will get loaded up with 15 carries in the first half, have 80 yards and a touchdown going into halftime, and you'll be feeling very good about having started Dobbins in your lineups.
Yeah, I was going to say his touch upside is like in the 30s. I feel like at this point, like it's crazy. And they're going to play keep away so well with that. I'm excited to see what the time of possession is after this game. I mean, if Arizona can their only chance is if they get James Conner rolling in this one and get some momentum with him. But if they just come out in like the 3 and outs that we keep seeing them do, and Harrison's probably not going to play. We did get word that he was practicing this week, but typically with the concussion guys, it's 2 weeks. So love JK in this one. I've seen him in a couple of rankings down in like the early to mid-teens. I've got him, I want to say like 9 this week. I might even have him
7.
higher. 7. Yeah, I've got him 7 this week. So yeah, I'm all in on Dobbins.
Yeah, I have him at 11 currently, but I need to move him up to 8. So I'm going to move him ahead of Achane. I don't know what I was doing on my first pass. I have Jordan Mason against Kansas City at 10. That is not going to stick. We're going to talk about him in a little bit. But yeah, so a great play this week for Dobbins. Make sure he's locked and loaded into your lineups, all formats. The next start that we're going to talk about, your second guy here is Chase Brown.
Yeah, so I think last week we kind of saw the script flip a little bit in Chase Brown's favor. This was the first time he'd been on the field for more than 60% of the snaps, obviously taking over from Zach Moss. We know Brown on the season has been more explosive than Zach Moss. I just think that, they trusted Moss more in pass protection. But I don't know. I just feel like this is one of those backfields that is definitely shifting in Brown's favor. I think the Bengals should be able to take care of the Browns this week, which could lead to even more rush opportunities from Brown if they are kind of grinding out the clock.
Yeah, and I want to highlight too that the role might have officially changed last week. He went from being in the 30s and 40s in snap percentage every game to 62 last week. And that was reflected because Moss had a terrible fumble and then didn't play again. So again, I don't know if it's injury, if it was partially injury related because Moss came in with an injury, or if it was just like, okay, that we've kind of been trending this way, and then now that's going to be the moment in the season where it kind of broke Chase Brown's way. So I do like him. I think against Cleveland, he might have some tough sledding here, and if he is still sharing with Moss at all, that's going to be tough. He has been involved in the passing game, but Moss has still been more involved in the passing game. So maybe that shifts a little bit as well. And we see him get more than 3 targets for the first time this year. So, we'll see. But I do like Chase Brown as a player overall. I've been trying to trade for him in our league without success. But I think he's overall a solid play. So getting into our last start of the week here is Austin Ekeler. So that might be surprising because we have seen back-to-back limited practices from Brian Robinson, and he is expected to play at this point, we would guess. But they're going up against the Panthers. There's going to be plenty of room to roam here. I do think Ekeler has shown that he's, no matter what's been very involved in the passing game as long as he's been on the field. So I think he'll have a little bit of opportunity to break a play or two there in the passing game. Maybe he gets 4 or 5 targets. And then, as long as he still gets his 5, 7, 10 carries, even with Brian Robinson there, I do think, 50 yards rushing, 40 yards receiving is something that's in the range of outcomes for him. Maybe a score, maybe not a score, but in PPR, that'll get you over 10 points. In half-point PPR, that should get you over 10 points as well. So I do think overall, if you're stuck or you've been relying on Ekeler, I think you can go right back to him in this great matchup against Carolina.
Yeah, and Washington's an 8-point favorite in this game too, so they should be able to handle, the Panthers pretty easily. So I think with Brian Robinson coming off of injury, they're not necessarily incentivized to make him the workhorse in this game, right? Like I think he'll be out there. I think he'll be the starter. I think he'll look good. Like I heard last week, he was a lot closer to playing than maybe we had thought. But yeah, I just think why risk further injury when this team has pretty high aspirations this year, which maybe we didn't expect coming into the season.
Yeah. For sure. I can totally get behind that, right? And any additional expansion on Ekeler's role, I think is just cherry on top. I think even if Brian Robinson is going to get his 15 touches in this game, I do still think that there's plenty of room for Ekeler to be very productive in this game, somebody that you want to be starting as at least a flex if you can find a way to get him into your lineups. The first sit that we're going to talk about here is Najee Harris going up against the Jets. So I think that kind of says it all.
Yeah, definitely tough against the Jets. And, he's coming off the best game of his year. He rushed for over 100 yards. He had a score. I know you texted me before the game asking about a few different players, and my response was, Najee's got to score at some point, right?
Yeah.
And he did. But that was against the Raiders' bottom third run defense. They won this game by 3 scores. And on top of him facing off against, a much tougher Jets defense this week, I think the change to Russ kind of negatively impacts Najee potentially. I think the threat of Fields running and running the read option no longer necessarily exists with Russ. Their already banged up offensive line has been allowing Najee 0.9 yards before contact, and now they just lost their center Zach Frazier. So it's going to be tough sledding for him. And I don't know, with Warren getting healthier, I think that can cut into his touch share a little bit. I know Najee has been the workhorse, but he hasn't necessarily been that great in games when Warren and Cordero Patterson have been out. I think last week was maybe a little bit more of an outlier, so I would be sitting Najee this week.
Yeah, and if you have Najee, there's a pretty good chance that you're not able to entirely get away from him. But I have a situation where I have him and Ekeler, and I'm going to be starting Ekeler over him this week. And that is in full PPR, so a little bit easier than in half PPR to make that decision. But, Najee looked good last week, and it was only on 45% snaps, right? I mean, they literally could have loaded him up with a lot more carries if they weren't kicking the crap out of the Raiders. Yeah. So, I don't know. I think overall he could still volume his way in this game to, 8-10 points if that's what you're looking for. If that's, kind of just the reliable put him in, don't mess with it, don't have a complete bottom out week. I could see, in that aspect. But overall, if you're looking for upside, you're in a matchup where you need some points, he's a good guy to try and get on your bench this week. Going into my first sit, it's going to be a tough sell here, I think, is Tyrone Tracy. And Singletary, I think, could be back this week, but I do think that based on how Tracy has played, he has carved himself out some sort of major role in the backfield. And whether or not Singletary even gets the job back at this point, I think is open for interpretation. We're going to be watching very closely once he is active. But he's going up against the Eagles this week. And even though he has seen a snap share increase both of his 2 weeks as a starter, and he saw 6 targets, he was awesome as a receiver in this game, which is, kind of his calling card. We've talked about it extensively that he was a wide receiver converted running back last year. So like seeing him work in the passing game has been more of the expectation. I just don't know if this game is going to be very high scoring. I don't know that he's going to be able to run the ball very effectively. I know he only had 2.9 a carry, but I don't expect him to score in this game. And so you might be looking at him as like, oh, I've got like a legitimate set and forget RB2, like a top 15 running back here on my hands. And I don't think that's the case yet. I do think that, I'm pumping the brakes on him. I have him in a dynasty league. I'm majorly pumping the brakes. I'm excited maybe for next year, and I'm excited to have him on my roster. But in terms of like expecting a lot this year, I'm still not quite there with Tracy.
Yeah, I mean, if Singletary goes, I would be sitting both, but I don't know. I think there's something to be said about just like riding the hot hand. And Philadelphia is like just not as good of a defense as maybe we want to think they are.
Not good against the pass. Like if they're going to get got, they're going to get got in the pass. So if Tracy gets a big passing game roll, then this is probably going to go not my way. But if it's kind of back to not just like focusing on him in the passing game, it's going to be tough sledding between the tackles.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And didn't they just lose their left tackle too?
Yep, Thomas.
Okay,
he's out.
Yeah, that's brutal. So yeah, that kind of adds to this point even more.
He might be the best player on their offense, Andrew Thomas. So, losing him is obviously brutal. So it's going to be tough for Daniel Jones too, I think. But, maybe they run him more away from that spot and just try and keep him upright. So, all right, getting into the next sit. Your second sit is Bucky Irving. You mentioned hot hand was sticking with Tracy, so Bucky Irving I think has the hot hand in Tampa Bay here. So let's hear the sit case for Bucky.
There's a couple hot hands in Tampa Bay right now, and I get it, right? Like Bucky's coming off a great game. He's looked great all year. He was one of the reasons that Rachaad White was kind of on my do not draft this year because I thought he was just a really good running back. But in this game, there's a chance that Rachaad White comes back. They've got Baltimore, who is the best run defense in the NFL, and not to mention Sean Tucker looked incredible the last week too. And I just think I don't know, it's going to be so tricky to figure out because the coach said today, we're just going to ride the hot hand. And it sounds like it's shaping up to be a 3-headed monster. Even if it's a 2-headed monster in this game against Baltimore, I'm still trying to sit Bucky Irving.
Yeah. And this is all about the matchup, right? I mean, they're playing Baltimore, probably the best run defense in the league. And the other thing that you didn't touch on is that White might not play, but he might play. And you're not going to know that until Monday night. I do expect that decision on White to be more of a game time decision. And so you're setting your lineup with Bucky and you're not knowing whether or not White's going to play. So I get it. If White was out, maybe you're a little bit more confident putting him in your lineup, even in this tough matchup, because he could get some passing game work. The offense overall is good. So they're going to have a productive day against Baltimore, I would guess, as an overall offense. But yeah, I'm behind you on this one. I don't think Bucky is somebody that I'd be looking to this week if I could avoid it. And then my second sit here is Nick Chubb. I don't think anybody listening wants to hear this. If you have Chubb, you're all excited. He's finally coming back, right? There's like a lot of excitement around him. Ford just got hurt too, so he's not even going to be playing in this game. So it's like, oh man, is Chubb like fully healthy? Is he going to actually handle 20 carries? And it's against Cincinnati, who's like gettable on the ground. It's like this is not a good defense in his first matchup. But despite all of that enthusiasm, I just want to tap the brakes a little bit on him here. I do think that this is a very bad offense. Okay, very, very bad offense. So they can load up the box against them. They just got rid of Amari Cooper, which is only going to tighten the screws on the passing game. He's not involved at all in the passing game, hasn't been in the past, and I don't think that that's going to be something that he's just all of a sudden going to be featured off of this injury. So I think, temper expectations here. Get him on your bench. Be excited to have him, but I think better days are ahead. Looking ahead though, it is Baltimore, Chargers, and a bye. So you're getting all excited to play him, right? And this might be the only time in the next month you could play him, and I would still be sitting him. So I'd temper expectations a little bit on Chubb this week. If you do want to play him, I don't blame you. That's part of having fun with fantasy, right? It's like your guy is back, but I would personally be looking to bench him this week.
Yeah, I guess a couple things to add on top of that is, one, you haven't been using him, right? And so there's a good chance you've got two other running backs, unless that other guy was Jerome Ford. Like a lot of zero RB drafters took Ford and then Chubb and then had him on IR, similar to like the Chuba and Brooks situation. So if that's kind of your only option, like go for it. You got your guy back. But what do you think about, you mentioned with this week, and then you mentioned with two tough games and then a bye. If you've been sitting on Chubb, like what about like a sell high candidate before he even plays?
Yeah, I would be definitely trying to sell him. If you can turn him into somebody that's been hurt, or I've been saying sell Chuba Hubbard, but I might even take Chuba Hubbard for him, or especially if you're in a spot where you need wins, Chuba is probably over these next 2 weeks going to be very productive and like an automatic start. So if you're like not doing very well and somebody is excited about Chubb and wants him, that's something that I would definitely be considering trying to sell. I'd rather have Chase Brown, I think, than him. Personally, I would rather have Brian Robinson, right? We talked about him with the Ekeler thing, but if like somebody's worried about that injury, he might not be full go this week, and somebody's willing to part with him if you add Chubb with a receiver to get him, I would definitely be trying to do something like that. I think that's a good call, honestly. A very, very strong sell high candidate, or somebody in your league thinks they're getting, second round pick Nick Chubb. Moving on to our sleepers here. We've got our first one, Raiders running back Alexander Mattison.
Yeah, Alexander Mattison. This feels a little bit gross, but I guess that's why it's a sleeper. In the 2 weeks that he's been the starter while Zamir White is out, he's had to face the Broncos and Steelers, which are very tough defenses. He performed decently well in those matchups. He scored 9 and 15 fantasy points, obviously the latter being aided by a touchdown. White is back at practice this week, but I'm not sure how much that matters with how bad White has been this year. I think the most encouraging thing for Mattison, despite how much better he's looked than White, is how good he's been in the passing game. And this week he gets a great matchup, right? He gets the Rams, who are the number 32 ranked rush defense, which is obviously pretty bad. Even if they are trailing in this one, I would expect a decent amount of targets from O'Connell. And I think we're getting reports again on Thursday that Jacoby Myers has missed another practice, so that could lead to even more volume. So if you're in a pinch, you can do worse than Mattison in what should be a good matchup this week.
Yeah, he had a tough matchup last week too, and scored. Had a lot of work in the passing game. He got a receiving touchdown called back on like a tack penalty too. That was really unfortunate, because then he would have had a huge day. The efficiency is not going to be good, but like it's not like White is the epitome of efficiency. So like, I do think he's going to kind of take over the role. We've been saying that this is the running back you want in this backfield for a month now. So I do like, even if Zamir plays, I think it's a good call against a bad defense. Mattison should be able to produce here. My sleeper for the week is Tank Bigsby. This one might be a little bit cheating, because if Etienne doesn't play, like, of course, right? He turns into more of a start. But he's going up against New England. I don't know how effectively they're going to be able to throw the ball with Christian Gonzalez on Brian Thomas Jr. It feels like a lot of an Engram Kirk type of game through the air. And, against New England, their rush defense isn't anything to write home about. Bigsby has been extremely efficient 2 of the last 3 weeks. I know he kind of had a down week last week, but I think that was because he didn't really play. It was like D'Ernest Johnson the whole time. They were chasing. They were down big early against the Bears in London. Etienne got hurt. So I think it was just a weird game. And I do think this week they should be able to keep the game a lot closer than they did against the Bears. And I think Bigsby could be in for a solid workload here, 12 to 15 carries. And if there's no ETN, he could be even better.
Yeah. I mean, those 2 weeks where he was kind of lighting it up, he was like electric, right? So let's not forget about that. I like this call a lot. And even though kind of one of my calls of the week was New England winning this game, I don't think it's going to be a blowout like it was when Jacksonville played against the Bears. So I
they're
think
not going to be down 20 no matter what, right? They're not going to be down 20.
Yeah. And they're going to need to establish the run. Bigsby's looked good. Like I said, like I think a lot of people probably bit a lot of fab on him and then got really frustrated last week. Maybe they dropped him. Maybe they, are just benching him. But I think in this matchup, I like him a lot.
Yeah. Oh, I hope they didn't cut him. Bigsby is on your waiver wire. Go get it. Like,
and not only that, because if ETN gets traded too, then you have the RB1.
Traded, injury, like just out of the good graces of the coach. I don't know what's going on, right? Like, but if Bigsby got cut, that's somebody you definitely want on your roster. Ignore the projections. I don't even know what it's projected for this week. I don't care. Bigsby is somebody you want on your team. Going over to your bust of the week now, I'm going to talk about a couple players that, are ranked really high, really good players that we don't necessarily think are going to have good weeks. And yours for this week is James Cook.
Yeah, so love James Cook this year. He's obviously been great. He was kind of an unfortunate scratch Monday night, but he's logging full practice. He's off the injury report as of Thursday, but he's got a tough matchup against the Titans. They're top 10 rush defense, but more importantly, in my opinion, Ray Davis just looks so good against the Jets. And I think it's hard for the Bills to just ignore that. I know Cook is their guy. I know they want to pound the rock, but Bills are a 9-point favorite in this one. And with Cook coming off an injury, I just think there's a chance that they get up early and they just kind of ride Davis to the end of this game.
So would you change your mind on this if Ray Davis doesn't play? I don't know if you saw, but he's not practicing with a calf injury. So if Davis doesn't go, do you think Ty Johnson takes over that role of like taking on some garbage time work maybe, or take over some of the work from James Cook if he really isn't 100% go during the game?
Yeah, it was weird. I saw a tweet about it, but I couldn't find anything concrete on Ray Davis. So if that was the case, I think I would be more inclined to. I mean, I guess with bust, right? Like I'm still starting James Cook in most formats.
Yeah, of course, you're still starting.
Yeah, I'm just.
It's a confidence thing, right?
Yeah, I think either way, like tempering expectations a little bit. But if Davis is out, then I would move Cook up a few spots for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point. Davis looked so good. Like, it was unfortunate that Cook missed if you picked up Ty Johnson, which happened in our league, and it cost the manager his matchup. But if you picked up Ray Davis, you were rocking with Davis. He was like, oh my God, 150 yards, like multiple catches, led the team in receiving. Like,
he should have had another touchdown too.
Yeah,
Josh Allen vultured him.
Yeah, vultured him. He took it down to the one both times, and they ran it in with Allen. The penalty backed him up, then ran it down to the one, and Allen again. So yeah, I mean it's hard to argue with how good Davis looked. So, like you said, maybe sticking with the theme this week of kind of hot hands on guys that weren't necessarily the starters coming into the year. This is another one where it's Cook is a full practice, but if it really is turf toe that he's dealing with, only missing one game is a tough bar to clear, right? And he's going to play, but maybe manage the expectations on it. If somebody else in the backfield is playing more and you're wondering why, we're telling you right now why that's going to happen. My bust call of the week, last guy I'm going to talk about here is Jordan Mason. He's coming off an injury, right, to his shoulder, didn't play in the second half last week, and they were able to run the ball. They still were able to be effective on the ground even without him, but he's likely going to be cleared to play, right? He's still limited in practice, but he's going to be able to start this game. But this is much more about the matchup in Kansas City. Going up against a top 3 run defense, them and Baltimore have just been so good against the run this year, and I don't think that's going to give in to Mason, even if he gets a huge workload here. So I don't expect to see an alert from Sleeper saying Mason broke a 35-yard run. It's like, it feels like that happens every week. And so, even though he had 73 yards in the first half last week, I think that's probably more than he's going to be able to get this week. Hasn't scored in, has only had 1 touchdown his last 4 games. So I do think on the ground too, maybe they're limited and they're going to have to try and beat Kansas City through the air. And so for that reason, I just think Mason's going to be more of a bust this week. And like, if he starts, he's almost impossible to get away from. So It's not like I'm saying you should be sitting him or anything. I just think in this matchup, maybe another 8-point game is in store because he's got back-to-back 8-point games.
Yeah, I could see like 15 for 86 and then 1 catch for 12. Maybe if he gets a little bit out there.
Yards.
Yeah. So I get that. And Kansas City's tough. I'm really excited about this game. I don't know what to think about it. There's just so many like different scenarios that I'm kind of painting in my head. Obviously, Seattle last week isn't, the run defense that Kansas City is. So I think that was a little bit easier. And I'm not in the camp of like people that are worried about Isaac Guerrero long term. I think, at least my opinion on Guerrero in kind of like the pre-draft process and even now is like someone that's that freakish of an athlete that's buried that deep in the draft. I worry about like, is their vision bad? Like, what's got to give? And I get it. He can hit the home run, but I think it's Mason's backfield until McCaffrey returns, obviously.
Yeah, you mentioned hitting the home run, right? Like, that's what he did last week, right?
Yeah.
He had 99 yards, but don't get fooled into thinking he was like some guy marching off 12-yard runs like Mason can do. That is not what happened. It was tackle behind the line, tackle behind the line, tackle behind the line, 78-yard run, tackle behind the line. It's like so.
Are they using Guerrero on kickoffs?
Yeah, he's a special team player, I think. Right now. That's why he's active. That's why he kind of stepped in. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so let's just put it this way. There's a reason that Mason has been averaging over 25 carries or 25 touches a game, and Rendo's been healthy. Rendo's been healthy and not playing, right? There's a reason for that. So as long as Mason can go, it's going to be more of the same there in terms of role. Mason, too, another one, right? If you can sell him for what he's been, or you can sell him to the Christian McCaffrey owner for anything at this point, I'm trying to do that, right? They get Kansas City, Dallas in their bye. So maybe Dallas has a pretty good, is a good run defense, right? Sell that matchup as one, like, look, they got a tough matchup this week, but he's a starter still. He's got a good matchup before his bye, can possibly help you get a couple wins here and get like a bench player back for him or a bench wide receiver, especially if you're in three wide receiver leagues. If you can get a wide receiver 4, or a flex consideration player for your team for him, that's something that I still would be doing. Like I think McCaffrey's coming back. I think he's going to be back in week 10. If you can add Mason as a sweetener to like a bigger deal too, like if somebody will buy into him as a starter and you can really trade up and go get somebody, you can go get somebody like Terry McLaurin, who we've been talking about for your third or fourth wide receiver. That's something I think you should be doing.
Yeah, you kind of lost me with like the 1-for-1, but in a package deal, I think that's a little bit more realistic because as someone in one league, I've just been riding Mason and I've been really happy about it. And I'm pretty good at wide receiver. I'm like, I'm just going to see this out until the sunset and then figure it out after that. But as part of a package deal, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and that's another way to think about it. If you're all set, you can just keep riding him, or you can sell him to the McCaffrey and really try and swing big. But you can also ride him out and then sell him as a handcuff, which maybe that would still net you some sort of bench player. But I had him in a league. I had him in a dynasty league, and I'm like, I gotta get rid of him. Got to get what I can for him now. So, and I don't own him anywhere else. So I have sold all my shares of Mason, and that's what I would recommend you can do as high as you can get right now. All right, and with that, thank you guys so much for watching. We look forward to talking to you guys in the next one. Beat the Waiver Wire is next, so we look forward to getting you some names here for week 8 that could be valuable moving forward as well. So talk to you then.
Later.